Chapter 16. Landor's Cottage. A Modern Retelling. A pendant to the domain of Arnheim. As I walked through some of New York's river counties last summer, the day began to fade, and I found myself confused about which path to take. The land was rolling so much that, after traveling for an hour, I had twisted and turned so many times in the valleys that I no longer knew how to get to the lovely village of B, where I planned to spend the night. Although the sun hadn't truly shined all day, the heat was uncomfortable. A smoky mist, reminiscent of Indian summer, covered everything and only added to my confusion. However, I wasn't too worried. Even if I didn't reach the village before sunset or even once it got dark, I was sure I would come across a cozy Dutch farmhouse or something similar. Although this area was sparsely inhabited, possibly because it was more scenic than fertile, I wouldn't have minded spending the night under the stars with my backpack as a pillow and my dog as a guard. So, I continued my stroll without a care, with my dog Ponto carrying my gun, until I finally found a clearer path, an obvious carriage track that I couldn't mistake. The tracks from light wheels were visible, and although the tall shrubs and wild growth intertwined above me, the way was completely clear below, even allowing for the passage of a sturdy mountain wagon. The road was different from any I'd seen before. Although it was open through the light trees, the tracks were barely visible. They had left a faint impression on the firm yet pleasantly moist surface of what looked more like green velvet than grass. It was soft, thick, and bright green grass, unlike anything we usually see outside of England. Not even a dead branch lay on the path. Everything appeared purposely cleared. The stones that once littered the route were neatly placed along the edges, defining it with a picturesque quality. Clumps of wildflowers thrived in the gaps. I wasn't sure what to make of it all. It was clear that some artistry was involved, and while all roads are works of art in the ordinary sense, I found the extent of this artistry curious. Of course, it could have been created with minimal effort given the natural beauty of the area. It wasn't the amount of artistry that fascinated me, but rather its unique character, which compelled me to take a seat on a flowering stone and admire this enchanting path for over half an hour. The longer I sat, the more clear it became that an artist with a keen eye for detail had overseen everything. Careful consideration had been given to balance the neatness and gracefulness on one hand with the picturesque style on the other. There were few straight lines, and no long uninterrupted sightlines, providing a sense of variety within unity. It was an impressive composition where even the most critical eye would find it hard to suggest improvements. After sitting for a while, I turned to the right and continued down the path. It twisted and turned so much that I could barely see more than a few steps ahead of me, but the path remained consistent. Soon, I began to hear the gentle sound of water, and as I turned a corner, I saw a building down the slope ahead. The mist obscured my view of it, but just then, a slight breeze began to rise with the setting sun, gently clearing away the fog and revealing the scene below. As the view unfolded before me bit by bit, first a tree, then a flash of water, and finally the tip of a chimney, I almost felt like I was observing one of those clever vanishing pictures that come to life before your eyes. However, by the time the fog fully cleared, the sun had dipped behind the hills and re-emerged from a crack in the landscape to illuminate the valley with a purplish light. Suddenly, everything below came into stunning clarity as if by magic. The first impression I received when the sun glinted through was similar to the awe I felt as a child witnessing the final act of a grand theater production. The bright colors of the sunset bathed everything in orange and purple, while the vibrant green of the valley reflected off the lingering mist, which clung to the air and made the scene even more beautifully surreal. The small valley I gazed down into was about 400 yards long, varying in width from 50 to 150 yards. Narrow at the north end and gradually widening towards the south, it stretched irregularly. The widest section was about 80 yards before reaching the southern end. Along its flanks, gentle slopes surrounded the valley, except for the northern side, where the granite cliff rose nearly 90 feet high, squeezing the valley to a mere 50 feet wide at that point. As one moved southward, the hills became gentler and less steep, forming a series of slopes that softened as they reached the southern end, creating an almost cozy enclosure. To the north, just beyond the cliff's edge, magnificent hickories, black walnuts, and chestnut trees surrounded the precipice, some even leaning over the edge. As I moved southward, I noticed the trees becoming less grand, first elms, then sassafras and locusts, and finally cozy, smaller varieties like linden, redbud and maple. The further I moved into the southern end of the valley, the more I encountered low shrubbery, save for an occasional silver willow or white poplar. On the valley floor, I saw 3 solitary trees. One was a beautiful elm standing proudly over the southern entrance to the valley. Another was a grand hickory, even larger than the elm, standing in the rocky outcrop near the northwest entry. It angled towards the sun, spreading its beautiful branches wide. About 30 yards east of the hickory was the pride of the valley, an incredible triple-stemmed tulip tree, the Liriodendron tulipiferum, belonging to the magnolia family. The 3 trunks branched out at about 3 feet off the ground, diverging just enough to not touch each other more than 4 feet apart at their highest point, about 80 feet up. The tallest trunk stood a solid 120 feet high. The tulip tree's leaves, glossy and vibrant green, were about 8 inches wide, but they paled in comparison to the opulently colored flowers that adorned it, resembling clusters of the largest, most magnificent tulips. The whole amphitheater was blanketed in grass that matched the softness and vividness of that on the road I had just traveled, only thicker and greener. It all felt surreal. As I noted, there were 2 openings out of the vale. From the one to the northwest flowed a gentle stream, bubbling as it meandered down toward the rocks where the hickory tree grew. After curving around the tree, it headed northeast, passing 20 feet south of the tulip tree, and continuing onward until it turned at right angles, flowing generally to the south until it reached a lovely oval lake nestled at the valley's lower end. This lake was about 100 yards wide at its widest point, its transparent waters revealing a bottom made entirely of bright white pebbles. Its banks curved gently, seamlessly merging into the sparkling water, making it seem almost impossible to distinguish where the bank ended and the shimmering lake began. The fish within the lake appeared to float mid-air, giving off the impression of flight due to the clarity of the water. A light canoe rested peacefully on the surface, its reflection capturing even the tiniest details. A small island adorned with blooming flowers rose from the lake's northern shore, holding a picturesque little building that appeared to be a chicken coop. This island was connected to the main shore by a beautiful single plank bridge made of tulip wood. Gliding 40 feet long, the bridge maintained a gentle arch, adding charm to its utility. From the southern end of the lake, the stream continued, meandering for about 30 yards before passing through a depression in the southern slope, and tumbling down a sheer drop of about 100 feet, winding its way toward the Hudson. The lake was quite deep, some portions reaching 30 feet, while the creek was shallow, no wider than 8 feet at its maximum. Both bodies of water were beautifully clear. The grass covering the amphitheater floor was beautifully soft and vibrant, inexplicably creating a picturesque image in my mind. As for the brook, it wound its way lazily near the middle of the amphitheater. In this area, it meandered toward the eastern and western rocky cliffs, which were steep but adorned with lush ivy. The northern precipice, too, was almost completely covered with grapevines growing lush and wild from crevices. A low stone wall crowned the edge of this little paradise, preventing deer from escaping. While there were no fences elsewhere, none were needed. The cliffs naturally restricted any wandering animals back toward the stream. The only entrances and exits to the valley were through the rocky gate situated a short distance down the road I had been following. As I mentioned earlier, the brook meandered in 2 distinct directions, first from west to east, and then from north to south. Each loop formed a gentle peninsula that almost appeared as an island, about 1/16 of an acre in size, and at its center stood the cottage. When I say that the cottage was as uniquely styled as any fantasy creation, I simply mean that it struck me with a feeling of wonder, an ethereal sense of beauty that I can only define as poetic. This definition of poetry captures its magic, something so perfectly natural, reflecting its surrounding beauty, can't be easily described. The cottage was modest, simple in design, but its very arrangement made it captivating, like something created by a skilled landscape painter. The initial angle from which I viewed the cottage wasn't the best perspective, so I'll describe it as I later saw it from the stone wall at the edge of the amphitheater. The cottage was about 24 feet long and 16 feet wide, with a total height not exceeding 18 feet. Attached to the west side was a smaller structure, about a third its size, set back about 2 yards from the main building. At the rear, an even smaller third room extended from the main one, roughly 1/3 smaller than the west wing. The roofs of the 2 larger buildings were steeply pitched, extending about 4 feet from the walls, forming roofs for 2 porches. While the design didn't call for support, simple pillars were placed at the corners for a touch of elegance. A tall, slender chimney of Dutch bricks, alternately black and red, adorned the side of the 2 larger roofs between the main cottage and west wing. The chimney had a small brick cornice at the top. In the main structure, the front door was slightly off-center, to the east, with 2 elongated, narrow windows to the west that didn't reach the floor and had single shutters, each composed of diamond-shaped panes. The door's upper half was made of glass covered by a movable shutter for night. The door to the west wing was straightforward, with just 1 window facing south. The northern wing had no external door and only 1 window to the east. The east gable wall had stairs leading up to a door that accessed a storage loft, illuminated only by a small window facing north. While the porches didn't have floors, the ground beneath them was laid with large, flat stones set into the soft grass, providing stable footing in all types of weather. Amazing stone paths led to a crystal spring about 5 paces away, to the main road, or to a couple of outbuildings hidden behind some locust and catalpa trees. Only 6 steps from the cottage door stood a dead pear tree, covered in bright bignonia flowers, making it hard to tell what type of tree it was. Various bird cages hung from its branches. One contained a mockingbird, another an oriole, and yet another held an excited bobolink, with a few more delicate cages filled with canaries. The porch was framed by jasmine and honeysuckle, while a lush grapevine twisted along the eaves, sprawling from the lower roof to the higher one and reaching towards the east gable. The charming cottage was clad in traditional Dutch shingles, wide with flat edges. This kind of material gave the house an optical illusion, making it look wider at the base than at the top, resembling the design of ancient Egyptian structures. And in this instance, the effect was enhanced by many colorful flower pots that adorned the building's base. The shingles themselves were painted a dull gray, creating a neutral backdrop that harmonized beautifully with the vibrant green leaves of the tulip tree casting shade over the cottage. From my vantage point near the stone wall, I could see the cottage to great advantage, the southeast angle subtly pushed forward, allowing me to glimpse the main facade along with the east gable while providing a view into the northern wing. I didn't linger on the hill too long, though I had enough time to admire the mesmerizing view before me. I realized I had strayed from the road leading to the village, so I had the perfect traveler's excuse to open the gate and ask for directions. Without further thought, I made my way forward. After passing through the gate, the path followed a natural ledge, gently sloping down the northern cliffs toward the main structure of the house. The path brought me to the foot of the precipice and led me over a bridge to the front door. During this walk, I noticed I couldn't see any of the outbuildings. As I rounded the corner of the gable, a large mastiff bounded out to meet me, silent yet alert, resembling a fierce tiger. I extended my hand in greeting. I've never encountered a dog that could resist such a gesture of goodwill. The mastiff not only calmed down but wagged his tail and even offered me his paw. Noticing there was no doorbell, I knocked on the half-open door with my stick. Instantly, a figure appeared at the threshold. A young woman, about 28 years old, slender, just above average height with a charming presence. As she approached, there was an indescribable confidence in her steps. In that moment, I thought I had stumbled upon the perfect blend of natural and graceful beauty. But what struck me more profoundly was the intensity radiating from her expressive eyes. Nothing I had encountered before conveyed such a sense of romantic fervor or otherworldliness. This gaze seemed to pierce through me, igniting an interest I couldn't quite explain. For me, romance and womanhood are closely linked. What a man truly adores in a woman is her essence of femininity. The woman before me, whom I now realized was called Annie, embodied this completely. Her eyes were a deep, spiritual gray. Her hair was a light chestnut. That was all I had time to see. She welcomed me inside, where I stepped into a pleasantly sized vestibule. To my right, there was a window mirroring the ones in front of the house. A door to the left led into a main room, and directly opposite me, An open door revealed a room that resembled a small study, featuring a large bow window facing north. Entering the main parlor, I met Mr. Landor, as I would later discover him to be called. He greeted me cordially, but at that moment, my focus remained on the fascinating way the house was arranged rather than on the man himself. Now I noticed the north wing was a bedroom with a door opening into the parlor. One window faced the brook on the west side. There was a fireplace at the far end of the parlor, and a door leading to the west wing, likely the kitchen. The parlor's furniture was incredibly simple. The floor was covered with a woven carpet, a white background dotted with small green circles. The windows had white muslin curtains, full but nicely structured, falling elegantly to the floor. The walls were covered with a delicate French wallpaper, silver with a faint green zigzag running through. The space was accented by 3 exquisite lithographs by Julian, each displayed without frames. One piece showed a luxurious scene from the east, another was a lively carnival moment, and the last was a Greek woman's head, an incredibly beautiful face yet strikingly ambiguous, capturing my attention completely. The main furniture consisted of a round table, a few chairs, and a settee made of plain maple painted creamy white, subtly striped green, with cane seating. Everything had the same enchanting look and felt like it was designed by the same mind behind the landscape outside, breathtakingly artistic. On the table lay a few books, a large glass bottle filled with a new fragrance, a plain glass lamp with an Italian shade, and a beautiful vase overflowing with vibrant flowers. The only decorations in the room were these bright blooms, filling the space with an intoxicating aroma. A stunning arrangement of geraniums filled the fireplace, while similar vases watched over every corner, holding various lovely blooms. Bouquets of violets decorated the mantel and overflowing pots filled the sills. As previously mentioned, my aim was to sketch a clear image of Mr. Landor's home as I found it, not to detail his backstory or motives just yet, as that may lead to another tale altogether.